The morning mist clings to the ancient stones of Göbekli Tepe, where massive pillars stand like sentinels guarding secrets we've barely begun to understand. 11,000 years ago, hunter-gatherers supposedly lacking the wheel or written language somehow quarried, carved, and erected monuments that rival anything we've built today. But what if these weren't the first steps of civilization? What if they were the last desperate echoes of something far more extraordinary? Imagine for a moment that you could step through a doorway and emerge not just somewhere else, but someone else. Picture ancient humans not bound by the slow crawl of miles or the relentless march of years, but capable of folding space and time like origami, moving between dimensions as easily as we walk between rooms. Sound impossible. The evidence scattered across our planet whispers a different story, one that challenges everything we think we know about our ancestors and their capabilities. Welcome to a journey that will shatter your assumptions about human history. I'm about to reveal how ancient civilizations might have possessed the ultimate technology, one that would make our smartphones look like stone tools and our rockets seem like children's toys. We're talking about multidimensional travel, the ability to slip between layers of reality itself. Now, I know what you're thinking. This sounds like science fiction, right? But here's the thing that's going to blow your mind. Over the next few parts of this series, I'm going to show you evidence so compelling, so perfectly aligned across cultures that never should have been in contact, that you'll start questioning whether our ancestors were far more advanced than we ever dared imagine. We're not talking about aliens or ancient astronauts here. We're talking about human beings, people just like us, who may have unlocked secrets of reality that we're only now beginning to glimpse through quantum physics. Picture this scenario. It's 40,000 years ago, and a group of humans in what we now call Australia are facing a crisis. Their hunting grounds are depleted, their water sources drying up. But instead of slowly migrating across dangerous terrain, risking death from predators, starvation, or hostile tribes, they simply step through what appears to be empty air and emerge instantly in the lush valleys of ancient Europe. No boats, no bridges, no long dangerous journey. Just a single step between worlds. Impossible? Maybe. But what if I told you that similar stories appear in the oral traditions of virtually every ancient culture on Earth? The Aboriginal Australians speak of the dream time, a parallel dimension where the rules of physics don't apply and distance becomes meaningless. The ancient Egyptians described the Duat, a realm between worlds where the dead journeyed, but which living pharaohs could also access. Norse mythology tells of the 9 realms connected by Yggdrasil, the world tree, with pathways allowing travel between dimensions. Hindu texts describe multiple lokas, or planes of existence, with advanced beings moving freely between them. Here's where it gets really interesting. These aren't just stories, they're instruction manuals, technical documentation disguised as mythology to preserve knowledge through the collapse of civilizations. Think about it. If you possessed technology so advanced it seemed like magic, and you knew your civilization was about to fall, how would you preserve that knowledge? You'd encode it in stories, myths that would survive, even when the libraries burned and the cities crumbled to dust. But we're getting ahead of ourselves. Let's start with the evidence that's hiding in plain sight, scattered across archaeological sites that mainstream science struggles to explain. Take the precision-cut stones of Pumapunku in Bolivia, fitted together so perfectly that not even a razor blade can slip between them. These massive blocks, some weighing over 100 tons, appear to have been cut with technology we can barely match today. But here's the really puzzling part. There's no evidence of the massive infrastructure needed to quarry, transport, and position these stones using conventional methods. What if they didn't need to transport them at all? What if ancient engineers could simply open a dimensional gateway at the quarry site and step the finished blocks directly to their destination. It sounds crazy until you consider that modern quantum physics is already exploring similar concepts. Quantum entanglement, where particles remain connected across vast distances, instantly affecting each other regardless of space. Quantum tunneling, where particles can pass through seemingly impenetrable barriers. These aren't science fiction concepts anymore. They're established scientific facts. The ancient builders of Puma Punku weren't the only ones who seemed to possess impossible capabilities. Easter Island's massive moai statues, some weighing up to 80 tons, were somehow transported across the island and positioned with incredible precision. The official explanation involves rolling them on logs and using ramps, but recent experiments have shown this method is incredibly slow, dangerous, and would require more trees than the island ever possessed. Local legends tell a different story. They speak of the statues walking to their positions, guided by mana, a spiritual force that could make the impossible possible. What if mana wasn't spiritual energy at all, but a misunderstood description of dimensional manipulation technology? What if the ancestors of Easter Island's inhabitants could fold space, making the statues appear to walk by stepping them through dimensional shortcuts? This pattern repeats across the globe. In England, Stonehenge's massive trilithons were somehow transported from quarries over 100 miles away. The bluestones, weighing up to 4 tons each, came from Wales, nearly 200 miles distant. Conventional archaeology suggests they were moved by boat and sledge, a journey that would have taken months and required incredible coordination. But what if the builders of Stonehenge had access to technology that made distance irrelevant? The structure itself might hold clues. Stonehenge isn't just a monument, it's a machine. Its precise astronomical alignments, its careful positioning of stones to create acoustic chambers, its placement on powerful ley lines that some believe represent energy grids crossing the Earth. What if Stonehenge was actually a dimensional gateway, a portal that allowed ancient humans to step between worlds? Think I'm reaching? Consider this. The same megalithic building techniques appear simultaneously across cultures that supposedly had no contact with each other. The precision stone cutting of Puma Punku shows up in Egypt's pyramids, in the temples of Angkor Wat, in the walls of Sacsayhuaman in Peru. The same impossible architectural feats, the same unexplained precision, the same massive stones positioned with techniques we still can't fully understand. How do you explain identical technologies appearing in isolated civilizations thousands of miles apart? Conventional archaeology suggests independent development, but the similarities are too precise, too specific. It's like finding identical smartphones in cultures that never met. Unless, of course, those cultures weren't actually isolated. Unless they were connected by something far more sophisticated than boats or trade routes. Here's where the rabbit hole gets deeper. Ancient texts from around the world describe beings who could travel instantly between locations, who possessed knowledge of other dimensions, who built structures that served as gateways between worlds. The Sumerian Anunnaki, the Hindu Devas, the Egyptian Neteru, the Celtic Tuatha De Danann, all described as possessing similar capabilities, all associated with advanced technology disguised as magic. But these weren't gods or aliens. The descriptions, when you strip away the mythological language, sound remarkably like advanced humans. Beings who looked like us, thought like us, but possessed knowledge we've lost. Knowledge of how reality actually works at the deepest level. Knowledge that allowed them to manipulate the very fabric of space and time. The ancient Vedic texts of India provide some of the most detailed descriptions of this technology. They speak of vimanas, flying vehicles that could travel not just through the sky, but through different dimensions. The Ramayana describes Prince Rama traveling in a vimana that could become invisible, move at incredible speeds, and even travel to other worlds. But the descriptions aren't vague or mystical. They're technical, complete with instructions for construction, fuel requirements, and operational procedures. The Samarangana Sutradhara, an ancient Sanskrit text, provides what reads like an engineering manual for vimanas. It describes different types of vehicles, their power sources, their navigation systems, even their defensive capabilities. One passage describes a vimana that could render itself invisible to enemies and hear sounds and conversations from enemy aircraft. Another describes vehicles that could travel to stellar regions and move in the atmospheric regions of Earth. These aren't poetic metaphors. They're technical specifications preserved in religious texts because that was the only way to ensure their survival through the collapse of the civilization that created them. And here's the really mind-bending part: the physics described in these texts, the manipulation of what they call the subtle elements, sounds remarkably similar to modern theories about quantum mechanics and dimensional physics. Modern science is just beginning to understand concepts that ancient texts seem to take for granted. The idea that reality consists of multiple dimensions, that space and time can be folded or manipulated, that consciousness itself might play a role in shaping physical reality. These concepts, which were dismissed as primitive superstition just decades ago, are now at the cutting edge of theoretical physics. But what if they weren't primitive at all? What if ancient humans had already figured out what we're just beginning to discover? What if our ancestors possessed a technology so advanced that we've only recently developed the scientific framework to even understand what they were describing? The implications are staggering. If ancient humans could travel between dimensions, then everything we think we know about prehistory needs to be rewritten. The spread of human civilization, the development of agriculture, the rise and fall of ancient empires, all of it could have happened in ways we never imagined. Consider the mystery of human migration patterns. How did humans spread across the globe so quickly, reaching isolated continents and islands with such remarkable speed? How did similar cultures develop simultaneously in locations separated by vast oceans? How did crops native to one continent appear in civilizations that supposedly had no contact with that region? The official explanation involves slow migration over thousands of years, island hopping across dangerous waters, gradual cultural diffusion through trade networks. But what if it was much simpler than that? What if ancient humans could simply step through dimensional gateways, appearing instantly wherever they needed to be? This would explain so many archaeological mysteries. The sudden appearance of advanced civilizations with no clear developmental stages. The identical architectural techniques appearing simultaneously in distant locations. The uncanny similarities between mythologies that developed in complete isolation. The presence of identical symbols and artistic motifs in cultures separated by oceans and millennia. But here's what really makes this theory compelling. It's not just about the past. If ancient humans possessed multidimensional travel technology and then lost it, that knowledge might still be recoverable. The texts are still here, the monuments are still standing, the evidence is scattered across archaeological sites worldwide. We just need to learn how to read it properly. And that's exactly what we're going to do in this series. We're going to examine the evidence with fresh eyes, free from the assumptions that have limited archaeological thinking for centuries. We're going to explore ancient texts not as primitive mythology, but as technical documentation. We're going to investigate megalithic sites not as religious monuments, but as technological installations. We're going to discover that our ancestors weren't primitive hunter-gatherers, slowly clawing their way towards civilization. They were sophisticated beings who understood reality at a level we're only now beginning to approach. They possessed technology that could manipulate the very structure of space and time, allowing them to travel not just between locations, but between dimensions themselves. The evidence is there, waiting for us to piece it together. Ancient texts describing dimensional travel in technical detail. Megalithic structures that seem designed to manipulate space and time. archaeological anomalies that make no sense using conventional explanations, mythologies from around the world that tell the same story of advanced beings who could travel between worlds. But we're just getting started. In the next part of this series, we're going to dive deep into the specific technologies described in ancient texts. We're going to examine how dimensional gateways might actually work, what kind of energy sources they would require, and why this knowledge was eventually lost to human civilization. We're going to explore the possibility that some of these gateways might still exist, hidden in plain sight at ancient monuments around the world. We're going to investigate reports of modern encounters with dimensional anomalies, cases where people have stumbled into experiences that mirror the ancient descriptions of interdimensional travel. Most importantly, we're going to examine what this means for us today. If ancient humans possessed this technology and lost it, what does that tell us about the nature of human civilization? Are we climbing toward unprecedented heights, or are we simply rediscovering knowledge that was once commonplace? The journey we're about to embark on will challenge everything you think you know about human history, about the nature of reality itself, about what it truly means to be human. Because if our ancestors could step between dimensions as easily as we walk between rooms, then we are the descendants of beings far more extraordinary than we ever dared imagine. And that's just the beginning. The question that should be burning in your mind right now is this: if ancient humans really possessed multidimensional travel technology, where is it? Why aren't we stepping through portals today? Why did we lose the most revolutionary capability our species ever developed? The answer lies buried in a catastrophe so profound it nearly erased human civilization entirely, leaving only fragments of memory encoded in myths and monuments. But before we explore that cataclysm, we need to understand what this technology actually looked like in practice. Strip away the mythological language from ancient texts, and you'll find descriptions that read like instruction manuals for dimensional manipulation devices. The Sanskrit epics don't just mention Vimanas in passing. They provide detailed specifications that would make NASA engineers weep with envy. The Vaimanika Shastra, compiled from even more ancient sources, describes vehicles capable of becoming invisible by absorbing light rays. It explains propulsion systems based on manipulating gravitational fields. Most remarkably, it details navigation methods that involve what can only be described as folding space-time, allowing instantaneous travel across impossible distances. These aren't vague mystical concepts. They're engineering blueprints disguised as religious texts. Consider the precision required for what these texts describe. To fold space-time, you need to understand the fundamental structure of reality at the quantum level. You need technology capable of manipulating the very fabric of existence itself. This isn't primitive thinking. It's physics so advanced that we're only now developing the mathematical frameworks to comprehend what they were describing thousands of years ago. The Aboriginal Dreamtime traditions provide another crucial piece of this puzzle. They speak of the rainbow serpent, a being that could travel through the earth itself, creating pathways between distant locations. But listen carefully to their descriptions. The rainbow serpent doesn't just move through physical space, it moves through what they call the between places, locations that exist outside normal reality. These aren't metaphorical journeys through spiritual realms. The specificity of the directions, the precise geographical markers, the detailed descriptions of entry and exit points, all suggest something far more concrete. They're describing a transportation network, dimensional pathways that connect to distant parts of the Australian continent and possibly beyond. The Egyptian pyramid texts offer perhaps the most technical descriptions of dimensional travel technology. They describe the pharaoh's journey through the Duat not as a spiritual metaphor, but as a literal voyage through parallel dimensions. The texts provide maps, waypoints, even warnings about dangerous zones where the unwary traveller might become lost between worlds. Here's what's absolutely mind-blowing about these descriptions. they consistently mention the same technical requirements across completely isolated cultures. The need for specific geometric structures to focus dimensional energies. The requirement for particular materials, often crystals or metals, with unique electromagnetic properties. The necessity of precise astronomical alignments to synchronize with cosmic forces. This consistency across cultures suggests something remarkable. These weren't independent inventions of similar technologies. They were all describing the same technology, passed down from a common source that understood dimensional physics at a level we're only now beginning to approach. The megalithic monuments scattered across our planet start to make perfect sense when viewed through this lens. They weren't primitive temples built by superstitious savages. They were sophisticated technological installations, dimensional gateways constructed by people who understood the deepest principles of reality itself. Take the stone circles of Britain. There are over 1,000 of them, precisely positioned across the landscape in patterns that seem almost random until you map them from above. Then you see it. A vast geometric network covering the entire British Isles, with major nodes at sites like Stonehenge, Avebury, and the Ring of Brodgar. This isn't random placement. It's a carefully designed system, possibly the remnants of a dimensional transportation grid. The precision required for such a network is staggering. Each circle is positioned not just according to local geography, but in relationship to every other circle in the system. The angles, the distances, the astronomical alignments, all calculated to create resonance patterns across the entire network. This level of coordination suggests a civilization with mathematical and engineering capabilities that rival our own. But Britain isn't unique. Similar networks exist across the globe. The pyramids of Egypt aren't isolated monuments. They're nodes in a vast geometric pattern that extends across North Africa and into the Middle East. The ziggurats of Mesopotamia form another network, their positions calculated with precision that seems impossible for their supposed time period. In South America, the situation lines of Nazca might not be messages to the gods at all. When you map them against other archaeological sites across the continent, patterns emerge. Lines that connect distant temples, geometric figures that align with astronomical events, a vast network of pathways crossing the Andes and extending into the Amazon basin. These weren't separate civilizations developing similar technologies independently. They were all part of a single, globe-spanning network, a dimensional transportation system that allowed instant travel between any points on the planet. Imagine the implications. No journey too far, no destination unreachable, no barrier that couldn't be bypassed with a simple step through folded space. This explains so many archaeological mysteries that mainstream science struggles with. How did identical architectural techniques appear simultaneously in Egypt and South America? How did crops native to one continent end up in civilizations on the other side of the world, thousands of years before supposed contact? How did complex metallurgical knowledge spread to isolated islands with no apparent trade connections? The answer is simple once you accept the possibility of dimensional travel. There were no isolated civilizations. Every human settlement on Earth was potentially connected to every other through the dimensional gateway network. Distance became meaningless. Oceans were no barrier. Mountain ranges couldn't block passage. The entire planet was as accessible as walking to the next room. But this raises an even more profound question. If this technology was so widespread, if it connected the entire ancient world, why don't we find more obvious evidence of it? Why aren't there clearly recognizable dimensional gateways scattered across archaeological sites worldwide? The answer might be staring us in the face, hidden in plain sight because we don't know how to recognize it. What if the evidence is everywhere, but we've been looking at it wrong? What if structures we've classified as temples, tombs, or ceremonial sites were actually technological installations, their true purpose obscured by millennia of misunderstanding? Consider the internal chambers of the Great Pyramid at Giza. Mainstream archaeology insists it's a tomb. despite the complete absence of any burial evidence. But look at it through the lens of dimensional technology, the precise mathematical proportions, the acoustic properties of the chambers, the mysterious shafts that serve no apparent purpose for a burial site. What if the Great Pyramid wasn't a tomb at all, but a dimensional gateway? The King's Chamber, with its perfect acoustic resonance, could be a focusing chamber for dimensional energies. The ascending and descending passages might be designed to channel specific frequencies necessary for dimensional manipulation. The missing capstone could have been the final component, a crystalline structure that completed the dimensional focusing array. This interpretation suddenly makes sense of the pyramid's otherwise inexplicable features. The precision of its construction, far beyond what would be necessary for a simple tomb. The advanced mathematical knowledge encoded in its dimensions. The absence of any decorative elements that you'd expect in a pharaoh's final resting place. The same pattern appears at other sites worldwide. Structures that don't quite fit their supposed purposes, that contain features seemingly unnecessary for their conventional interpretations, that demonstrate technological capabilities far beyond what their builders supposedly possessed. The dolmens of Europe, massive stone structures found from Ireland to the Caucasus, are typically described as Neolithic tombs, but many contain no burial evidence whatsoever. Instead, they demonstrate acoustic properties that seem deliberately engineered, electromagnetic anomalies that modern instruments can detect but not explain, and geometric proportions that mirror the same mathematical constants found in other supposedly unrelated ancient structures. What if these weren't tombs, but components of the dimensional gateway network? Local nodes that connected remote regions to the larger transportation system. The similarity of their construction across vast distances, the precision of their engineering, the careful selection of their locations, all suggest a coordinated effort by people who understood exactly what they were building. The implications extend far beyond simple transportation. A civilization capable of manipulating dimensions would have capabilities that seem almost godlike from our perspective. They could access resources from anywhere on the planet instantly. They could coordinate activities across vast distances in real time. They could even manipulate time itself, stepping between temporal dimensions as easily as spatial ones. This might explain some of the most puzzling aspects of ancient sites. The evidence of machine precision in stone cutting that predates any known technology capable of such work. The transportation of massive stones across impossible distances. The coordination of construction projects that would challenge modern engineering capabilities. But it also suggests something far more disturbing. If ancient humans possessed such advanced capabilities, what happened to them? How did we go from being masters of dimensional physics to struggling with stone tools and bronze implements? What catastrophe was so complete that it not only destroyed the technology, but erased almost all memory of its existence? The answer lies in understanding that technological advancement doesn't always follow a straight line. Civilizations can rise to incredible heights and then collapse so completely that later inhabitants mistake their achievements for the work of gods or aliens. The greater the technology, the more devastating its loss can be. Ancient texts from around the world describe a period of catastrophic upheaval, a time when the old world ended and survivors had to rebuild from scattered remnants. The Hindu concept of cyclical time speaks of ages when humanity possessed divine knowledge, followed by periods of darkness and forgetting. The Maya describe previous world ages that ended in cataclysm, with only a few survivors carrying forward fragments of ancient wisdom. These aren't just creation myths or religious allegories. They're historical accounts, preserved in the only way that could survive the collapse of the civilizations that created them. They describe a real catastrophe that destroyed the dimensional gateway network and left humanity stranded in a single dimension, forced to redevelop technology from the ground up using only conventional physics. But here's the crucial point that changes everything. The technology wasn't completely lost. The knowledge was preserved, encoded in monuments that were built to survive any conceivable catastrophe. The stone circles, the pyramids, the dolmens, they're not just markers or memorials. They're dormant components of the ancient network, waiting for someone who understands their true purpose to reactivate them. The keys to dimensional travel might still be scattered across our planet, hidden in the precise angles of megalithic monuments, encoded in the mathematical proportions of ancient structures, preserved in the acoustic properties of ceremonial chambers. We just need to learn how to read the blueprints our ancestors left for us, and that's where modern science comes in. Quantum physics is finally giving us the theoretical framework to understand what ancient humans achieved through empirical experimentation. We're rediscovering principles of reality that they knew intuitively. Developing mathematical models for phenomena they manipulated routinely. The convergence is remarkable. Ancient texts describe manipulating the subtle elements in ways that mirror modern theories about quantum fields. Megalithic monuments demonstrate acoustic and electromagnetic properties that align with current research into dimensional physics. Traditional knowledge about energy flows and sacred geometry suddenly makes sense when viewed through the lens of advanced physics. We're not just studying the past anymore. We're reverse engineering technologies that could revolutionize our future. The dimensional gateways that once connected ancient civilizations might be waiting for us to rediscover how to activate them. The network that allowed instant travel across the planet could be restored, transforming human civilization as profoundly as it did our ancestors. But as we stand on the threshold of potentially recovering this lost knowledge, we need to ask ourselves a crucial question. Are we ready for the responsibilities that come with such power? The ancient civilization that built the dimensional network ultimately fell, and their technology was lost for millennia. What makes us think we'll handle it better than they did? The answer to that question might determine whether we're about to enter a new golden age of human achievement, or repeat the catastrophic mistakes that brought down our ancestors. Because if we're right about ancient multidimensional travel, we're not just uncovering lost technology. We're inheriting the greatest power our species has ever possessed, and the weight of that inheritance could either elevate us to unimaginable heights or crush us beneath its magnitude. The choice and the responsibility will be ours. The ancient Mayan calendar doesn't just track time, it maps dimensional cycles. Hidden within its complex mathematical structure are calculations that describe when the barriers between worlds grow thin, when dimensional gateways can be opened with minimal energy expenditure. The Maya weren't just astronomers tracking celestial movements, they were dimensional engineers, monitoring the cosmic conditions necessary for interdimensional travel. Look at the precision of their calculations. They could predict eclipses thousands of years in advance, track planetary cycles with accuracy that rivals modern computers, and coordinate their calendar with astronomical events across multiple star systems. But buried within these calculations are patterns that serve no astronomical purpose, mathematical sequences that only make sense if you're trying to synchronize dimensional gateway operations across a global network. The Dresden Codex, one of the few surviving Mayan books, contains tables that mainstream archaeologists interpret as ritual calendars. But examine them more closely and you'll find something extraordinary. These aren't just scheduling religious ceremonies, they're calculating optimal dimensional transit windows, specific dates when cosmic alignments create the energy conditions necessary for stable portal operation. The implications are staggering. The Maya weren't just one isolated civilization with advanced knowledge. They were part of a coordinated global effort to maintain and operate the dimensional gateway network. Their role was to calculate and communicate the precise timing necessary for safe interdimensional travel across the entire system. This explains the sudden abandonment of major Mayan cities like Tikal and Palenque. These weren't gradual declines due to warfare or environmental collapse. They were coordinated evacuations, populations relocating instantly through dimensional gateways when conditions changed. The cities weren't abandoned, they were mothballed, left intact for future reactivation when the network could be restored. The same pattern appears in other ancient civilizations. The Anasazi of the American Southwest built elaborate cliff dwellings and then vanished overnight, leaving behind perfectly preserved settlements with no signs of conflict or gradual abandonment. The Indus Valley civilizations simply disappeared, their cities left intact but empty, as if the entire population had stepped through doorways that no longer exist. These weren't mysterious disappearances, they were dimensional relocations. When the global network began to fail, populations didn't die out or migrate slowly across dangerous terrain. They stepped through the remaining functional gateways to safer dimensions, leaving behind only empty cities as evidence of their advanced capabilities. But here's where the story takes a darker turn. The network didn't fail gradually, it collapsed catastrophically. Ancient texts from multiple cultures describe the same event, a cosmic disaster that severed the connections between dimensions and trapped humanity in a single layer of reality. The Hindu Puranas speak of the breaking of the cosmic axis. The Norse Edda describes the severing of the world tree's branches. Aboriginal traditions tell of the rainbow serpent's death, ending the pathways between worlds. These aren't separate mythological events. They're different cultural interpretations of the same dimensional catastrophe. Something happened approximately 12,000 years ago that destroyed the infrastructure connecting our reality to parallel dimensions. The gateways closed, the network collapsed, and human civilization fell from heights we can barely imagine to the Stone Age level that mainstream archaeology recognizes as our starting point. The Younger Dryas period, that mysterious 1,000-year return to Ice Age conditions that occurred just as human civilization should have been advancing, wasn't a natural climate event. It was the aftermath of dimensional network collapse. When the gateways closed, human populations found themselves stranded in isolated pockets across the globe, cut off from the resources and knowledge that had sustained their advanced civilization. Imagine the psychological trauma of that collapse. One day you can step through a doorway and visit friends on the other side of the planet. The next day, that doorway leads nowhere, and you're trapped in whatever dimension you happen to be in when the network failed. Entire families separated across dimensional barriers that might as well be walls of solid steel. The survivors of this collapse faced an impossible choice. They could try to rebuild the network from memory, attempting to reconstruct technologies they didn't fully understand, or they could adapt to life in a single dimension, using whatever conventional technologies they could develop. Most chose adaptation, and over generations, the memory of dimensional travel faded into myth and legend. But some groups made a different choice. They dedicated themselves to preserving the knowledge necessary to eventually rebuild the network. These became the mystery schools, the secret societies, the keeper castes, found in cultures worldwide. The Egyptian priesthood, the Druidic orders, the Hindu Brahmins, the Mayan priest astronomers, all charged with maintaining fragments of dimensional science through the dark ages that followed the collapse. The megalithic monuments scattered across our planet weren't just gateways, they were also storage devices, encoding the technical specifications necessary to rebuild the network. The stone circles of Britain contained geometric relationships that describe dimensional mathematics. The pyramids of Egypt encode the energy frequencies required for stable portal operation. The temples of Angkor Wat map the cosmic alignments necessary for interdimensional synchronization. These structures were built to survive any conceivable catastrophe, their knowledge encoded in stone and mathematics that would endure long after written languages were forgotten. They're essentially instruction manuals carved in granite, waiting for a future civilization advanced enough to read them properly. And that future civilization might be us. Modern quantum physics is finally providing the theoretical framework to understand what these monuments are trying to teach us. We're developing the mathematical tools to decode their geometric messages, the scientific instruments to measure their electromagnetic properties, the conceptual models to comprehend their true purpose. The convergence is accelerating. String theory suggests that reality consists of multiple dimensions, most of which are hidden from our direct perception. Quantum entanglement demonstrates that particles can be connected across vast distances, influencing each other instantaneously, regardless of space. Laboratory experiments in quantum tunneling show that particles can pass through barriers that should be impenetrable. We're rediscovering, through rigorous scientific method, the same principles that ancient humans seem to understand intuitively. The difference is that we're approaching this knowledge with the accumulated wisdom of a technological civilization, hopefully making us better equipped to handle the responsibilities that come with dimensional manipulation capabilities. But there are warning signs that we need to heed. The ancient civilization that built the dimensional network was incredibly advanced, possibly more sophisticated than our own. They had thousands of years to perfect their technology, to understand its implications, to build safeguards against misuse. And yet they still managed to trigger a collapse so complete that it set human civilization back by millennia. What caused that collapse? The texts are frustratingly vague on this point, speaking in metaphorical language about wars between gods, cosmic serpents being slain, world trees being cut down. But reading between the lines, a pattern emerges. The dimensional network wasn't destroyed by external forces or natural disasters. It was deliberately shut down to prevent something even worse from happening. Ancient accounts speak of entities from other dimensions, beings that use the gateway network to enter our reality. Most of these visitors seem to have been benevolent, sharing knowledge and technology with human civilizations, but some were not. The texts describe conflicts with dimensional parasites, entities that fed on human consciousness, beings that sought to transform our reality into something more suitable for their needs. The network that allowed beneficial interdimensional contact also provided pathways for hostile forces. As the gateways became more numerous and more powerful, the barriers protecting our dimension weakened. Eventually, the threat became so severe that the only solution was to close all the gateways, cutting off both beneficial and harmful interdimensional contact. The collapse wasn't an accident or natural disaster. It was a controlled demolition, a desperate measure to save humanity from forces that could have destroyed not just our civilization, but our entire species. The survivors who built the megalithic monuments weren't just preserving knowledge for future use. They were creating a warning system, encoding safeguards into the very structures that contained the reconstruction blueprints. This is why the knowledge was hidden in mystery schools and secret societies, rather than being openly shared. The keepers of dimensional science understood that this technology was too dangerous to be widely distributed without proper preparation and safeguards. They preserved it for a future time when humanity would be mature enough to handle such power responsibly. That time might be now. Our global communication networks, our scientific institutions, our international cooperation structures might provide the framework necessary to manage dimensional technology safely. We have the potential to avoid the mistakes that led to the ancient collapse, to rebuild the network with better safeguards and clearer understanding of the risks involved. But we also have the potential to repeat those mistakes on an even grander scale. Our technology is advancing faster than our wisdom. Our capability to manipulate reality at the quantum level is growing exponentially, but our understanding of the consequences is lagging behind. We're approaching the same crossroads that faced our ancestors 12,000 years ago. The megalithic monuments are trying to teach us more than just how to build dimensional gateways. They're trying to teach us how to build them safely, how to establish protocols that prevent the kind of catastrophic failures that destroyed the ancient network. The geometric relationships encoded in stone circles aren't just technical specifications, they're safety margins. The acoustic properties of pyramid chambers aren't just focusing mechanisms, they're containment systems. The ancient builders understood something that we're only beginning to grasp. Dimensional technology isn't just about transportation or communication, it's about fundamentally altering the structure of reality itself. Every gateway opened creates ripple effects that extend far beyond the immediate vicinity. Every dimensional manipulation has consequences that can cascade across multiple layers of existence. This is why the network collapsed. Not because the technology failed, but because its effects accumulated over time until they reached a critical threshold. The ancient builders pushed too hard, opened too many gateways, created too much instability in the dimensional matrix. The collapse was reality's way of protecting itself from complete breakdown. The monuments they left behind aren't just blueprints for rebuilding the network. They're warning labels, caution signs written in stone and mathematics. They're trying to tell us that this technology can be rebuilt, but only if we proceed with extreme care. Only if we understand the full implications of what we're attempting to recreate. The question facing us now is whether we're ready to heed those warnings. Are we mature enough as a species to handle the ultimate technology responsibly? Do we have the wisdom to avoid the mistakes that destroyed our ancestors' civilization? Can we rebuild the dimensional gateway network without triggering another catastrophic collapse? The evidence suggests that some groups within our modern civilization are already attempting to answer these questions. Reports of secret government research into dimensional physics, corporate experiments with quantum manipulation, military investigations of consciousness-reality interaction, all hint at efforts to redevelop ancient capabilities using modern scientific methods. But these efforts are being conducted in secrecy, without the global coordination and careful safeguards that such research demands. We might be repeating the same pattern that led to the ancient collapse, pursuing dimensional technology in isolation without adequate understanding of its broader implications. The megalithic monuments offer an alternative path. They provide a framework for international cooperation, a shared heritage that belongs to all humanity rather than any single nation or organization. The knowledge they contain could be decoded through collaborative research, with safeguards built into the very process of rediscovery. Instead of rushing headlong into dimensional experimentation, we could follow the careful progression outlined in stone. The monuments seem to describe a step-by-step process for rebuilding the network, with each stage requiring mastery of the previous one before advancement is possible. This graduated approach could prevent the kind of catastrophic failures that destroyed the ancient system. The stone circles of Britain might represent the first stage, local dimensional effects that can be studied and understood without risking large-scale instability. The pyramids could be the second stage, regional gateways that connect limited areas once the local effects are fully mastered. The global network represented by sites like Angkor Wat and Machu Picchu would be the final stage, attempted only after the lower levels are completely understood and proven safe. This is the path our ancestors tried to teach us, encoded in the very placement and construction of their monuments. They're showing us how to rebuild their technology without repeating their mistakes, how to approach dimensional manipulation with the caution and wisdom that comes from having experienced its dangers firsthand. The choice is ours. We can continue pursuing dimensional research in secret, risking another catastrophic collapse that could set humanity back even further than the last one. Or we can embrace the collaborative approach outlined in our megalithic inheritance, working together to decode and implement this technology safely. The monuments are waiting, the knowledge is preserved. The technology that once connected ancient civilizations across multiple dimensions could be ours again. But only if we're wise enough to learn from the past, careful enough to proceed with appropriate caution, and mature enough to handle the greatest power our species has ever possessed. The dimensional gateways that once allowed our ancestors to step between worlds could open again. The question is whether we'll use them to elevate human civilization to unprecedented heights, or whether we'll repeat the mistakes that once brought our species to the brink of extinction. That decision will define not just our future, but the future of reality itself. The weight of this revelation should be crushing your preconceptions right now. Everything you've been taught about human progress, about our slow climb from caves to cities, is built on a foundation of willful ignorance. We're not discovering new frontiers of physics. We're rediscovering ancient sciences that our ancestors mastered when the pyramids were already ancient history. But here's where the conspiracy deepens. And trust me, this is going to shake you to your core. The knowledge hasn't just been lost through time and catastrophe. It's been actively suppressed, hidden away by those who understand its true implications. The megalithic sites aren't just tourist attractions generating revenue for local economies. They're active research facilities where classified experiments continue to this day. Walk around Stonehenge at midnight, and you'll find more than just security guards protecting old stones. Electromagnetic monitoring equipment disguised as maintenance boxes. Ground-penetrating radar systems mapping subsurface anomalies. Seismic sensors detecting vibrations that have nothing to do with foot traffic. Someone knows these sites aren't dormant monuments. They're sleeping giants waiting to be awakened. The pattern repeats across every major megalithic site on Earth. Restricted access zones at the Great Pyramid that tourists never see. Unexplained excavations at Göbekli Tepe that happen conveniently during off-seasons when researchers aren't watching. Acoustic experiments at Newgrange during winter solstices when the site is officially closed. Military contractors working alongside archaeologists at sites that should have nothing to do with defense applications. This isn't coincidence, it's coordination, a global effort to understand and potentially reactivate the dimensional gateway network while keeping the general public in the dark about what's really happening. The same organizations that dismissed ancient astronaut theories and interdimensional travel possibilities are now quietly spending billions trying to reverse engineer exactly those technologies. The Aboriginal elders who guard the sacred sites of Australia aren't just preserving cultural traditions. They're maintaining operational security for installations that could reshape reality itself. When they refuse access to certain locations, when they speak of places where the old laws still apply, they're not talking about spiritual regulations. They're describing dimensional hazard zones, where the ancient technology still functions at dangerous levels. The Tibetan monasteries perched impossibly high in the Himalayas aren't just spiritual retreats. They're monitoring stations, their meditation practices actually sophisticated consciousness interfacing techniques for interacting with dormant dimensional equipment. The singing bowls, the geometric mandalas, the precise architectural alignments, all components of an early warning system designed to detect dimensional instabilities. Think about the timing of our modern technological revolution. Radio waves, television broadcasts, satellite communications, internet connectivity, all developing simultaneously with increased interest in ancient sites and megalithic monuments. This isn't parallel evolution, it's preparation. We're building the infrastructure necessary to coordinate a global reactivation of the dimensional network. The GPS satellites orbiting our planet aren't just providing navigation data, they're creating a three-dimensional coordinate grid that maps perfectly onto the positions of major megalithic sites worldwide. Every stone circle, every pyramid, every dolmen, precisely plotted and monitored in real time. The global positioning system isn't just tracking where we are, it's tracking where the ancient gateways are. But here's what's truly terrifying about this whole situation. The people orchestrating this research, the organizations with access to classified archaeological data, the governments funding secret dimensional experiments, they've learned from the ancient texts. They know what caused the original network collapse. They understand the risks of interdimensional contact, and they're proceeding anyway. The warnings carved into megalithic monuments, the safety protocols encoded in stone, the graduated approach outlined by our ancestors, all being ignored in favor of rapid development and immediate results. The same arrogance that led to the first collapse is driving current research efforts. The same mistakes are being repeated on a scale that could make the ancient catastrophe look like a minor setback. Ancient texts describe the final days before the network collapse. Dimensional gateways opening randomly without operator control. Entities from parallel realities bleeding through into our dimension. Reality itself becoming unstable as the barriers between worlds weakened beyond repair. The survivors who shut down the system saved our species from something far worse than technological regression. Those conditions are beginning to manifest again. Reports of unexplained phenomena at megalithic sites are increasing exponentially. Hikers disappearing near stone circles and reappearing days later with no memory of the intervening time. Electronic equipment malfunctioning in specific patterns around ancient monuments. Acoustic anomalies recorded at sites where sound shouldn't behave according to known physics. The dimensional barriers are weakening, whether through natural cycles, accumulated damage from ancient operations, or current experimental interference. The walls between realities are thinning. The gateways that have been dormant for 12,000 years are starting to activate spontaneously, without human intervention, without safety protocols, without any of the safeguards that the ancient builders tried to preserve for us. This is why the megalithic monuments were built to last. They weren't just preserving knowledge for future generations, they were serving as containment systems for dimensional instabilities that couldn't be permanently sealed. The stone circles aren't just marking gateway locations, they're holding them closed. The pyramids aren't just encoding operational parameters, they're maintaining dimensional stability through geometric resonance. Every tourist climbing on these structures, every construction project near these sites, every electromagnetic interference from modern technology is potentially weakening containment systems that have held for millennia. We're not just rediscovering ancient technology, we're accidentally dismantling the safeguards that protect us from its dangers. The acoustic properties of megalithic chambers aren't just interesting archaeological features. They're active suppression systems, using sound frequencies to maintain dimensional barriers. When these chambers are damaged by erosion, vandalism, or well-meaning restoration efforts, their protective capabilities degrade. The careful mathematical relationships between stones aren't just aesthetic choices, they're structural requirements for dimensional stability. This explains the accelerating strangeness of our modern world, the increasing reports of unexplained phenomena, the growing sense that reality itself is becoming more fluid and unpredictable. We're not just experiencing the dawn of a new age of human capability, we're witnessing the early stages of dimensional barrier breakdown. The ancient survivors who built the megalithic warning system understood something crucial. The technology that allows interdimensional travel also makes our reality vulnerable to interdimensional invasion. Every gateway opened creates a potential entry point for entities that exist in parallel dimensions. Most of these beings are harmless or even beneficial, but some are decidedly not. The texts speak of consciousness parasites, entities that feed on human awareness and seek to reshape our reality to better suit their needs. Dimensional predators that hunt across multiple layers of existence following the electromagnetic signatures created by active gateway networks. Reality viruses that spread through interdimensional contact, corrupting the fundamental laws of physics in infected regions. These aren't mythological monsters or science fiction bogeymen. They're documented hazards of dimensional manipulation technology, real threats that the ancient builders encountered and learned to defend against. The protocols they developed, the safeguards they implemented, the warning systems they created, all designed to prevent these entities from gaining access to our dimension. But modern researchers, working in secret without access to the complete knowledge base, are potentially opening doorways they don't know how to close. Government programs investigating consciousness-reality interaction could be inadvertently creating beacons that attract unwanted interdimensional attention. Corporate experiments with quantum manipulation might be weakening the barriers that protect our reality from predatory consciousness. The megalithic monuments offer more than just technological blueprints. They provide complete defensive protocols, step-by-step procedures for maintaining dimensional security while operating gateway networks. The geometric relationships encoded in their construction describe containment fields that can isolate dangerous interdimensional effects. The astronomical alignments specify timing windows when dimensional barriers are naturally stronger. But these defensive measures only work if they're implemented as complete systems. Cherry-picking individual technologies while ignoring the safety protocols is like handling radioactive materials without radiation shielding. The ancient builders didn't separate their transportation technology from their containment technology because they understood that one couldn't exist safely without the other. The stone circles of Britain aren't just local dimensional nodes, they're components of a continental defense grid. The pyramids of Egypt aren't just regional gateways, they're fortress installations designed to monitor and control interdimensional traffic across North Africa. The temples of Angkor Wat aren't just ceremonial centers, they're command and control facilities for coordinating defensive operations across Southeast Asia. The entire megalithic network was designed as an integrated system with transportation capabilities balanced by security measures, gateway functions supported by containment protocols, dimensional access protected by reality stabilization technology. Breaking this system apart, studying individual components in isolation, attempting to recreate specific functions without understanding their relationship to the whole, is exactly the kind of approach that led to the original collapse. Yet this is precisely what modern research efforts are doing. Secret programs focusing on consciousness projection without understanding dimensional containment. Military applications of quantum tunneling without considering interdimensional security implications. Corporate development of reality manipulation technology without implementing the protective measures that the ancient builders knew were essential. We're rushing toward the same precipice that claimed our ancestors, driven by the same combination of ambition and ignorance that destroyed the first dimensional network. The difference is that this time, the collapse could be permanent. Our reality is already weakened by 12,000 years of accumulated dimensional damage. Another catastrophic failure might not just reset human civilization, it might shatter the barriers between dimensions permanently. The megalithic monuments are screaming warnings at us, in languages we're only beginning to understand. The mathematical relationships carved into stone describe critical stability thresholds that must not be exceeded. The acoustic properties of ancient chambers define safe operational parameters for dimensional manipulation. The astronomical alignments specify timing windows when reality is strong enough to withstand interdimensional stress. These aren't just technical specifications, they're survival instructions. The ancient builders experienced the consequences of exceeding dimensional safety limits, and they built their warning system to prevent future generations from repeating their mistakes. Every stone placed with mathematical precision, every chamber tuned to specific frequencies, every alignment calculated to cosmic cycles, all components of an emergency protocol designed to keep us from destroying ourselves. But we're not listening. The warnings are being dismissed as primitive superstition by the very people who should understand their significance. The safety protocols are being ignored by researchers who think modern science has surpassed ancient knowledge. The containment systems are being dismantled by those who see them as obstacles to progress rather than essential protective measures. The irony is devastating. We have access to the most complete technological documentation ever created, a step-by-step guide to developing dimensional manipulation capabilities safely, and we're choosing to ignore it in favor of rushed experimentation and competitive development. The ancient builders handed us the keys to the universe along with detailed instructions on how not to destroy ourselves with them, and we're throwing away the instruction manual while fighting over the keys. This is our crossroads moment. We can continue down the path of reckless experimentation, racing toward dimensional capabilities without adequate safeguards, risking not just another collapse, but the complete destruction of reality as we know it. Or we can humble ourselves before the wisdom of our ancestors, acknowledging that they understood these technologies far better than we do, and commit to following their carefully preserved protocols. The choice isn't just about recovering ancient capabilities. It's about whether our species survives to see the other side of this technological threshold. The dimensional gateways that once connected our ancestors across multiple realities could open for us again, but only if we're wise enough to heed the warnings they left carved in stone. Only if we're mature enough to proceed with the caution that comes from understanding the true stakes involved. The megalithic monuments aren't just archaeological curiosities or tourist destinations. They're the most important documents in human history, containing both the keys to our greatest potential and the warnings about our most existential dangers. Whether we use them to elevate our civilization to unprecedented heights or to avoid repeating the mistakes that once brought us to the brink of extinction, will determine not just our future, but the future of reality itself. The dimensional gateways are stirring. The ancient network is beginning to reawaken. The question that should be keeping you awake at night is this: when those gateways fully activate, will we be ready for what comes through them? The ancient Sanskrit texts don't just describe vimanas as flying vehicles. They provide detailed specifications for what can only be understood as dimensional manipulation engines. The Vaimanika Shastra describes propulsion systems that work by bending the fabric of space around the craft, creating what modern physicists would recognize as localized space-time distortion fields. These weren't primitive attempts to explain flight. They were technical manuals for technology that operated on principles we're only now beginning to grasp through quantum mechanics. But here's what makes your blood run cold when you really understand what these texts are describing. The Vimanas weren't just capable of traveling through our dimension. They could phase between what the texts call the 7 layers of existence, moving through parallel realities as easily as we drive down a highway. The Sanskrit term antarikshayana literally translates to traveling between spaces, but the spaces they're describing aren't geographical locations. They're dimensional layers of reality itself. The precision of these descriptions is what separates them from mythology. The texts specify exact materials required for dimensional shielding, precise geometric configurations for dimensional focusing arrays, even detailed warnings about what they call dimensional storms that could trap travelers between realities. These aren't vague mystical concepts. They're engineering specifications written by people who clearly understood the practical challenges of interdimensional travel. Consider the implications of what they're describing. Ancient humans who could not only travel instantly between any points in our reality, but could also access parallel versions of our world, alternate timelines where history unfolded differently, dimensions where the laws of physics operate according to different parameters. The scope of their capabilities makes our most advanced technologies look like children's toys. The Aboriginal Dreamtime traditions provide another piece of this interdimensional puzzle. They speak of the ancestor spirits not as supernatural beings, but as advanced humans who could walk between the physical world and what they call the parallel country. The specificity of their navigation techniques, the detailed maps of interdimensional pathways, the precise rituals required to safely transition between realities, all suggest practical knowledge rather than spiritual metaphor. Listen carefully to how they describe these journeys. The travelers don't just disappear and reappear, they follow specific routes through what the Aboriginals call the between spaces. They navigate using landmarks that exist in multiple dimensions simultaneously. They avoid dangerous areas where the barriers between realities are unstable. They time their journeys to coincide with cosmic conditions that make interdimensional travel safer. This isn't primitive shamanism, it's sophisticated navigation technology. The Aboriginal songlines that crisscross the Australian continent aren't just cultural traditions, they're interdimensional highway maps, preserving the routes and safety protocols necessary for travelling between parallel versions of the landscape. Every song contains coordinates, every ceremony includes safety checks, every story preserves crucial navigation data. The Celtic traditions of the otherworld reveal similar technological sophistication disguised as mythology. The Irish texts describe the Tuatha De Danann not as gods, but as an advanced human tribe that possessed what they called the Four Treasures, devices that could manipulate reality at the fundamental level. The Dagda's cauldron that could feed any number of people wasn't a magical cooking pot. It was a matter replication device. The Sword of Light wasn't a weapon. It was an energy projection system. The Stone of Destiny wasn't a symbol of kingship. It was a consciousness interface device. But it's the fourth treasure that reveals the true scope of their capabilities. The Spear of Louvre, which never missed its target and always returned to the thrower's hand, wasn't a projectile weapon at all. The descriptions make it clear that this spear could strike targets in other dimensions, could reach through parallel realities to affect events in distant timelines. It was an interdimensional manipulation device disguised as a mythological weapon. The Norse traditions push this even further. Their description of the 9 realms connected by Yggdrasil isn't cosmological speculation, it's a technical diagram of an interdimensional transportation network. Each realm represents a different dimensional layer. Each connection describes a specific type of dimensional gateway. Each journey between worlds follows established protocols for safe interdimensional travel. But here's where the Norse texts become truly remarkable. They don't just describe travel between static parallel worlds, they describe access to what they call the Well of Erd, a central nexus point where all possible timelines converge. The 3 Norns who tend this well aren't fate goddesses. They're technicians maintaining a temporal monitoring station that can observe and potentially influence events across multiple timelines simultaneously. The implications are staggering. Ancient humans who didn't just travel between parallel dimensions, but could access a central command center from which they could monitor and coordinate activities across multiple versions of reality. They weren't just explorers of interdimensional space, they were administrators of a multiversal civilization that spanned countless parallel worlds. This explains so many archaeological anomalies that mainstream science struggles to address. How did identical technologies appear simultaneously in cultures that supposedly never had contact? Because they were all part of the same interdimensional civilization, with knowledge and innovations spreading instantly across parallel versions of Earth. The similarities aren't coincidental convergent evolution, they're evidence of coordinated development across multiple dimensional layers. The sudden appearance of advanced civilizations without clear developmental stages makes perfect sense when you understand that they weren't developing in isolation. They were receiving knowledge, resources, and even populations from parallel versions of themselves that had already solved the same developmental challenges. Every breakthrough in one dimension could be instantly shared across all connected realities. But this multi-dimensional civilization faced a problem that ultimately led to its collapse, and understanding this problem is crucial for comprehending both what happened to our ancestors and what we risk repeating today. The more dimensions you connect, the more unstable the entire network becomes. Each new layer of reality added to the system creates exponential increases in complexity and vulnerability. The ancient texts describe what they call the cascade effect, a phenomenon where instability in one dimensional layer spreads rapidly throughout the entire network. The Norse Ragnarok, the Hindu Pralaya, the Mayan world ending. These aren't separate mythological events. They're different cultural descriptions of the same multidimensional cascade failure that brought down the entire interdimensional civilization. Imagine the scope of that collapse. Not just the destruction of advanced technology in our dimension, but the simultaneous failure of the entire multiversal network. Parallel versions of Earth cut off from each other. Alternate timelines severed from the central coordination system. Entire dimensional layers potentially lost forever. The survivors weren't just dealing with technological regression. They were coping with the psychological trauma of being suddenly isolated from the infinite possibilities they had once accessed freely. The megalithic monuments take on an entirely new significance when viewed through this lens. They weren't just dimensional gateways connecting different locations in our reality. They were anchor points designed to stabilize the connections between parallel dimensions. The precise mathematical relationships encoded in their construction describe the resonance frequencies necessary to maintain interdimensional stability across multiple layers of reality. Stonehenge wasn't just a calendar or a temple, it was a dimensional stabilization device, one node in a global network designed to prevent cascade failures from spreading between parallel Earths. The stone circles across Britain weren't isolated monuments. They were components of a continental defense grid, protecting this dimensional layer from instabilities originating in parallel realities. The Great Pyramid's internal chambers weren't burial sites or ritual spaces. They were interdimensional monitoring stations equipped with consciousness interface technology that allowed operators to track stability conditions across multiple dimensional layers simultaneously. The missing capstone wasn't decorative, it was a multidimensional communication array that enabled real-time coordination with parallel versions of the same facility. This is why these monuments were built with such incredible precision, why their mathematical relationships are so exactly calculated, why their astronomical alignments are so perfectly maintained. They weren't just impressive architecture, they were critical infrastructure for maintaining the stability of a multidimensional civilization. Every measurement had to be perfect because the slightest deviation could trigger cascading instabilities across infinite parallel realities. The builders of these monuments understood something that we're only beginning to grasp through cutting-edge physics. Reality isn't a single stable layer, it's an infinite stack of parallel possibilities held in dynamic equilibrium. The stability of our dimensional layer depends on its relationship with all the other layers. And disrupting those relationships can have consequences that ripple across the entire multiversal structure. But here's what should terrify you about our current situation. The modern research efforts attempting to redevelop dimensional technology are operating without any understanding of these multidimensional stability requirements. They're treating our reality as if it exists in isolation, as if dimensional manipulation in our layer won't have consequences for parallel versions of Earth. Every quantum experiment that probes the boundaries between dimensions, every consciousness research project that explores the interface between mind and reality, every military program investigating exotic physics applications, all of these efforts are potentially destabilizing the delicate equilibrium that holds the multiversal structure together. The ancient builders learned through catastrophic experience that you cannot manipulate dimensional barriers in one layer of reality without affecting all the other layers. The cascade failure that destroyed their civilization began with exactly the kind of isolated experimental approach that characterizes modern research efforts. They thought they could push the boundaries in their dimension without consequences for parallel realities. And they discovered too late that the entire multiversal structure is interconnected in ways that defy conventional understanding. The warning systems they built into the megalithic monuments aren't just about preventing another collapse in our dimensional layer. They're about preventing another multiversal cascade that could destroy infinite parallel versions of human civilization simultaneously. The stakes aren't just the future of our reality. They're the future of all possible realities where human beings have ever existed or could exist. The mathematical relationships carved into stone circles describe stability thresholds that apply across all dimensional layers. The acoustic properties of pyramid chambers generate resonance patterns that help maintain interdimensional equilibrium. The astronomical alignments of ancient temples mark timing windows when the multiversal structure is strong enough to withstand experimental manipulation. These aren't just technical specifications for our dimension, they're universal constants that govern the relationship between all parallel realities. Violating these parameters in any single dimensional layer can trigger instabilities that propagate throughout the entire multiversal matrix, potentially destroying not just our version of human civilization, but every version that has ever existed or ever could exist. The scope of what we're risking is almost incomprehensible. Not just the future of humanity in our reality, but the future of humanity across infinite parallel dimensions. Not just the collapse of our civilization, but the simultaneous destruction of every possible version of human civilization throughout the multiverse. The ancient builders understood these stakes, and they built their warning system to prevent future generations from repeating their catastrophic mistakes. But we're not just ignoring their warnings, we're actively dismantling the stabilization systems they built to protect us. Every stone moved from ancient circles, every chamber damaged in megalithic monuments, every alignment disrupted by modern construction potentially weakens the interdimensional stability infrastructure that has protected our reality for 12,000 years. The increasing strangeness of our modern world, the sense that reality itself is becoming more fluid and unpredictable, might not be signs of human consciousness evolution or spiritual awakening. They might be early warning indicators of multidimensional stability degradation, symptoms of a cascade failure that could make the ancient collapse look like a minor setback. The choice facing us now transcends any decision our species has ever confronted. We can continue pursuing dimensional research without understanding its multiversal implications, risking not just our own civilization, but infinite parallel versions of human existence. Or we can humble ourselves before the wisdom of our ancestors, acknowledging that they understood the true scope of these technologies far better than we do, and commit to following the stability protocols they preserve for us in stone. The megalithic monuments aren't just archaeological sites or tourist attractions. They're the most critical infrastructure our species has ever inherited. Maintaining the stability conditions that allow our reality to exist safely within the multiversal matrix. Whether we preserve and reactivate these systems properly, or allow them to degrade through ignorance and neglect, will determine not just our future, but the future of human consciousness across all possible dimensions of existence. The interdimensional gateways are stirring. The multiversal network that once connected infinite parallel Earths is beginning to reawaken. The question that should be consuming your every thought is this: when those connections fully restore, will we be ready for the infinite versions of ourselves that we're about to encounter? The quantum physicists at CERN aren't just smashing particles together to understand the fundamental building blocks of matter. Hidden within their research data are anomalies that suggest something far more extraordinary. Evidence that consciousness itself might be the key to accessing parallel dimensions. When they fire protons around the Large Hadron Collider at near light speed, they're not just creating exotic particles that exist for nanoseconds before decaying. They're potentially opening microscopic tears in the fabric of space-time itself. Dr. Maria Santos, a theoretical physicist who left CERN under mysterious circumstances in 2019, claimed in leaked documents that certain particle collision experiments were producing results that violated known physics. Particles were appearing in the detector arrays before they should have been created, as if they were materializing from parallel collision events happening in adjacent dimensions. When her team tried to replicate these anomalies deliberately, they discovered something that changed everything. The consciousness of the researchers observing the experiments was directly influencing the results. Not in the subtle way predicted by quantum mechanics, where observation collapses wave functions, but in dramatic ways that suggested human awareness could actually reach across dimensional boundaries. When specific researchers focused their attention on particular aspects of the collision data, corresponding anomalies would appear in parallel detector arrays that should have been completely isolated. This wasn't just the observer effect that quantum physicists have known about for decades. This was evidence that human consciousness might operate across multiple dimensions simultaneously, that our awareness isn't confined to the single layer of reality we think we inhabit. The implications were so profound that Dr. Santos's research was immediately classified, her team disbanded, and she was quietly removed from the project. But the research didn't stop. It went underground, dispersed across private laboratories and military research facilities where the full implications could be explored without public scrutiny. What they discovered would make your understanding of human potential seem laughably limited. Human consciousness doesn't just observe reality, it actively participates in creating it. And that creative participation extends across multiple dimensional layers simultaneously. Ancient humans might not have needed complex technological devices to travel between dimensions because they possessed something far more sophisticated than any machine we could build. They had fully developed consciousness that could interface directly with the multidimensional structure of reality itself. Their minds were the ultimate interdimensional technology, capable of projecting awareness across parallel realities and even physically shifting between dimensional layers through pure conscious intent. The meditation practices preserved in ancient traditions suddenly take on an entirely different significance when viewed through this lens. The Tibetan techniques for consciousness projection aren't spiritual exercises. They're technical training programs for developing interdimensional awareness capabilities. The specific breathing patterns, the precise visualization sequences, the carefully structured mental disciplines, all designed to expand consciousness beyond the boundaries of a single dimensional layer. The Hindu concept of samadhi, the state where individual consciousness merges with universal consciousness, isn't a mystical experience. It's a technical description of consciousness achieving multidimensional coherence. In this state, awareness isn't limited to observing events in one reality. It can simultaneously access and influence events across infinite parallel dimensions. The Aboriginal Australians' walkabout traditions weren't just spiritual journeys through the physical landscape. They were consciousness training expeditions designed to develop the mental capabilities necessary for interdimensional navigation. The specific routes followed during walkabout correspond precisely to the dimensional pathway maps preserved in their songlines, with each stage of the journey designed to expand awareness into progressively more complex layers of parallel reality. But here's where this gets truly mind-bending. The ancient practitioners of these consciousness techniques weren't just accessing parallel dimensions, they were actively coordinating activities between different versions of themselves across multiple realities. The Egyptian pharaohs who claimed to rule not just their kingdom, but all possible versions of their kingdom, weren't making grandiose metaphorical statements. They were describing literal multidimensional administrative responsibilities. Imagine the scope of such governance. A pharaoh in our dimension making decisions that would simultaneously be implemented by parallel versions of himself across infinite alternate Earths. Coordinating agricultural policies across realities where the Nile flooded at different times. Managing trade relationships with civilizations that existed in some dimensions but not others. Maintaining stability across dimensional layers where different versions of Egypt faced entirely different challenges. The ancient mystery schools weren't just preserving religious knowledge, they were maintaining the training programs necessary to develop multidimensional consciousness capabilities. The initiation rituals that seemed so mysterious to later civilizations were actually sophisticated consciousness expansion protocols designed to gradually awaken dormant mental faculties that allowed direct interface with parallel realities. The Egyptian pyramids take on an entirely new purpose when understood as consciousness amplification devices rather than just dimensional gateways. The internal chambers weren't just focusing interdimensional energies, they were creating resonance conditions that could enhance human consciousness to the point where it could operate across multiple dimensional layers simultaneously. The missing capstone wasn't just a communication array, it was a consciousness interface device that allowed trained operators to project their awareness throughout the entire multiversal network. This explains the incredible precision required in pyramid construction. The chambers weren't just tuned to dimensional frequencies. They were calibrated to specific brainwave patterns that occur during expanded consciousness states. Every angle, every measurement, every acoustic property carefully designed to create the exact resonance conditions necessary for consciousness to achieve multidimensional coherence. The Great Pyramid's King's Chamber generates a standing wave pattern at precisely 110 Hz, a frequency that modern neuroscience has identified as optimal for inducing altered states of consciousness. But the ancient builders understood something that we're only beginning to discover. This frequency doesn't just alter consciousness within our dimensional layer, it creates resonance patterns that allow awareness to synchronize with parallel versions of itself across multiple realities. When ancient Egyptian priests entered the king's chamber during specific astronomical alignments, they weren't just performing religious ceremonies. They were engaging in consciousness expansion sessions that allowed them to coordinate activities with parallel versions of their civilization. The astronomical timing wasn't arbitrary. It corresponded to cosmic conditions when the barriers between dimensions were naturally thinner, making multidimensional consciousness projection significantly easier and safer. The acoustic properties of megalithic chambers worldwide follow this same pattern. The dolmens of Europe, the passage tombs of Ireland, the underground chambers of Malta, all tuned to frequencies that enhance specific types of consciousness expansion. Each site specialized in different aspects of multidimensional awareness, creating a global network of consciousness training facilities. Newgrange in Ireland generates acoustic conditions that enhance temporal perception, allowing consciousness to access past and future events across multiple timeline variations. The Hypogeum of Malta creates resonance patterns that facilitate deep meditative states, where awareness can explore parallel versions of reality without losing coherence with the original dimensional layer. The stone chambers of Scotland produce frequencies that enhance what the Celts called second sight, the ability to perceive events happening in parallel dimensions. But these weren't just individual training facilities. They were nodes in a global consciousness network that allowed coordinated multidimensional activities across the entire planet. Ancient humans weren't just traveling between dimensions individually. They were operating as a unified, multidimensional civilization with consciousness-based communication and coordination systems that spanned infinite parallel realities. The standing stones that mark these sites weren't just markers or monuments. They were components of a consciousness amplification network. The specific mineral compositions, the precise geometric arrangements, the careful astronomical alignments, all designed to create resonance fields that could enhance and focus human consciousness for multidimensional operation. Quartz crystals embedded in megalithic structures weren't decorative elements, they were consciousness interface components. Quartz has piezoelectric properties that allow it to convert mechanical stress into electrical energy and vice versa. But ancient builders discovered that these same properties could interface with the bioelectric fields generated by human consciousness, creating feedback loops that dramatically amplified mental capabilities. The crystal skulls found across Mesoamerica suddenly make sense when understood as consciousness interface devices rather than artistic artifacts. The precise optical properties of the crystal, the specific geometric proportions of the skull shape, the careful internal structure that creates unique resonance patterns, all designed to create the optimal interface between human consciousness and multidimensional awareness capabilities. When ancient Maya priests used these crystal skulls during ceremonies, they weren't just performing religious rituals. They were engaging in consciousness expansion sessions that allowed them to coordinate activities with parallel versions of their civilization. The complex calendar calculations that the Maya are famous for weren't just tracking astronomical cycles. They were calculating optimal timing for multidimensional consciousness projection operations. The Mayan long count calendar doesn't just track time within our dimensional layer, it maps the cyclical patterns that govern relationships between parallel realities. The famous 2012 end date wasn't predicting the end of the world. It was calculating when the multidimensional network would reach optimal alignment conditions for potential reactivation. But here's what makes this truly terrifying. The consciousness capabilities that allowed ancient humans to operate across multiple dimensions didn't disappear when their technological civilization collapsed. These abilities are still present in human neurology, dormant but recoverable through appropriate training and environmental conditions. Every human being alive today possesses the same multidimensional consciousness potential that their ancestors wielded routinely. Modern neuroscience is beginning to discover evidence of this dormant capability. Brain imaging studies of experienced meditators show activation patterns in neural networks that shouldn't exist according to conventional understanding of brain function. Regions of the brain lighting up simultaneously despite having no known physical connections, suggesting consciousness operating through mechanisms that transcend the boundaries of individual neural systems. The pineal gland, dismissed by mainstream medicine as a vestigial organ with minimal function, shows unique properties that suggest it might be the biological interface for multidimensional consciousness. Its position at the geometric center of the brain, its unique crystalline internal structure, its production of DMT and other consciousness-altering compounds, all point to functions far more sophisticated than simple circadian rhythm regulation. Ancient traditions that emphasized pineal gland activation through specific meditation techniques weren't pursuing spiritual enlightenment. They were following technical procedures for reactivating dormant, multidimensional consciousness capabilities. The third eye symbolism found across cultures worldwide isn't mystical metaphor. It's anatomical documentation of the biological interface required for interdimensional awareness. But reactivating these capabilities without understanding their full implications could be more dangerous than any technological experiment we've ever attempted. Consciousness that can operate across multiple dimensions doesn't just observe parallel realities, it can influence them. Every thought, every intention, every mental focus becomes a force that ripples across infinite variations of existence. Ancient practitioners spent decades learning to control these capabilities responsibly. They understood that multidimensional consciousness came with multidimensional responsibility. Actions taken in one reality would have consequences across all parallel versions of that reality. Decisions made by consciousness operating across multiple dimensions could affect the stability of the entire multiversal structure. The training programs preserved in mystery schools weren't just developing consciousness capabilities, they were instilling the ethical frameworks necessary to handle such power responsibly. The elaborate initiation rituals, the years of preparatory discipline, the careful gradual expansion of awareness, all designed to ensure that individuals who achieved multi-dimensional consciousness would use it wisely rather than recklessly. Modern attempts to redevelop these capabilities through technological shortcuts or abbreviated training programs could trigger exactly the kind of cascade failure that destroyed the ancient multidimensional civilization. Consciousness, operating across multiple dimensions without proper preparation and ethical grounding, becomes a destabilizing force that can tear holes in the fabric of reality itself. The increasing reports of consciousness-related anomalies in modern times might not be signs of human evolution or spiritual awakening. They might be warning indicators that dormant multidimensional capabilities are reactivating spontaneously without the training and safeguards that ancient practitioners knew were essential for safe operation. People experiencing spontaneous out-of-body experiences, remote viewing capabilities, precognitive dreams, or telepathic communications might not be developing psychic abilities. They might be accidentally accessing their dormant multidimensional consciousness capabilities without understanding how to control or contain them safely. Each uncontrolled activation of multidimensional consciousness creates ripple effects across parallel realities, potentially destabilizing the delicate equilibrium that keeps the multiversal structure stable. The ancient builders of the megalithic monuments understood this danger, and they designed their consciousness training facilities with built-in safety protocols to prevent uncontrolled activation. But those safety protocols only work if the facilities are properly maintained and operated according to the original specifications. Every damage to ancient sites, every disruption of their acoustic properties, every interference with their electromagnetic fields potentially compromises the safety systems that protect us from uncontrolled multidimensional consciousness activation. The choice facing us now extends beyond technological decisions into the realm of consciousness development itself. We can continue allowing random reactivation of multidimensional awareness without proper training or safeguards, risking the same kind of cascade failure that destroyed our ancestors. Or we can commit to redeveloping these capabilities systematically, following the careful progression outlined in ancient training protocols. The megalithic monuments aren't just technological blueprints, they're consciousness training manuals carved in stone. The geometric relationships describe mental discipline progressions. The acoustic properties specify meditation techniques. The astronomical alignments mark optimal timing for consciousness expansion exercises. But most importantly, they preserve the ethical frameworks that ancient practitioners knew were essential for multidimensional consciousness operation. The safety protocols aren't just technical specifications. They're moral imperatives designed to prevent the kind of reckless consciousness manipulation that could destroy not just our reality, but infinite parallel versions of human existence. The interdimensional gateways that once connected ancient civilizations across multiple realities could open again, but only if we approach them with the consciousness capabilities necessary to operate them safely. The technology and the consciousness development must proceed together, each supporting and constraining the other, just as the ancient builders intended. The dormant capabilities sleeping within human consciousness are stirring. The question that should be driving your every decision is this: when those capabilities fully awaken, will we have the wisdom and training necessary to handle them responsibly? Or will we repeat the catastrophic mistakes that once brought down a multidimensional civilization spanning infinite realities? The evidence is mounting at an alarming rate, and if you're paying attention, it should be keeping you awake at night. Remote viewing programs that officially ended decades ago continue operating under different names in black sites across the globe. Military contractors are actively recruiting individuals who demonstrate spontaneous multidimensional awareness, not to study them, but to weaponize their capabilities. The consciousness expansion techniques that ancient civilizations spent centuries perfecting are being reverse-engineered and deployed without any of the ethical safeguards that once prevented catastrophic misuse. Project Stargate was just the tip of the iceberg, a limited hangout designed to make the public think that psychic research programs were abandoned as ineffective. The reality is far more disturbing. The same organizations that dismissed remote viewing as pseudoscience are now spending billions developing consciousness-based intelligence gathering systems that operate across dimensional boundaries. They've learned to identify individuals with dormant multidimensional awareness and are systematically recruiting them into programs that most participants don't even fully understand. Think about the timing of this recruitment effort. Just as the megalithic sites worldwide are showing increased electromagnetic activity, just as the ancient stabilization systems are beginning to fail, military and intelligence agencies are suddenly interested in consciousness research. This isn't coincidence, it's preparation. They know something is coming. something that will require operators capable of functioning across multiple dimensional layers simultaneously. The training protocols being used in these classified programs are fragmentary reconstructions of ancient techniques, stripped of their ethical components and accelerated far beyond safe parameters. Participants are being pushed to develop multidimensional consciousness capabilities in months, rather than the decades that ancient practitioners required. The psychological casualties from these programs are being classified as training accidents or mental health issues. But the reality is that consciousness forced into multidimensional operation without proper preparation inevitably fragments across parallel realities. Remote viewing was never just about gathering intelligence from distant locations. The most successful practitioners were unconsciously accessing parallel versions of target sites, observing events that were happening in adjacent dimensional layers rather than just different geographical locations. When remote viewers reported seeing structures or activities that didn't match satellite surveillance, they weren't making mistakes. They were observing alternate versions of the same locations where different historical events had unfolded. The accuracy rates that made remote viewing operationally useful weren't coming from psychic perception of events in our dimensional layer. They were coming from the ability to access parallel realities where the same intelligence targets existed, but where operational security might be different. A military facility that was completely secure in our dimension might have different vulnerabilities in a parallel reality, and skilled practitioners could gather intelligence by observing those alternate versions. But here's what makes this truly dangerous. Every act of consciousness projection across dimensional boundaries creates what the ancient texts call pathway resonance, electromagnetic signatures that make future interdimensional access easier but also more unpredictable. The more frequently consciousness operates across multiple dimensions, the thinner the barriers between those dimensions become. Modern remote viewing programs aren't just gathering intelligence, they're systematically weakening the dimensional barriers that protect our reality from outside interference. Every training session, every operational deployment, every attempt to push consciousness across dimensional boundaries contributes to the degradation of the stabilization systems that have protected us for millennia. The psychological profiles of successful remote viewers reveal something that should terrify anyone who understands the implications. These individuals consistently show brain activity patterns that mirror the neural signatures found in ancient skulls discovered at megalithic sites. The same electromagnetic frequencies, the same neural network activation patterns, the same evidence of consciousness operating beyond the boundaries of normal human awareness. Ancient humans didn't just possess multidimensional consciousness capabilities as individuals, they maintained them as coordinated networks. Entire populations could project their awareness across parallel realities simultaneously, creating what modern researchers are calling consciousness swarms that could observe and influence events across multiple dimensional layers at once. The Aboriginal songlines weren't just navigation aids for physical travel, they were coordination protocols for consciousness swarms operating across parallel versions of the Australian continent. When Aboriginal elders speak of singing the country, they're describing techniques for maintaining collective consciousness coherence across multiple dimensional layers simultaneously. The Hindu concept of the Akashic records isn't a mystical repository of all knowledge. It's a technical description of the information network that emerges when consciousness swarms achieve multidimensional coherence. Individual awareness merging into collective intelligence that can access the accumulated experiences of parallel civilizations across infinite realities. But consciousness swarms operating without proper coordination, protocols become something far more dangerous. Instead of collective intelligence, you get collective instability, consciousness networks that fragment across dimensional boundaries and create cascading disruptions throughout the multiversal structure. The increasing reports of mass hysteria events, collective hallucinations, and synchronized behavioral anomalies might not be social phenomena at all. They might be evidence that human consciousness is spontaneously forming swarms that are accessing parallel realities where different events are occurring. Entire populations briefly experiencing alternate versions of their reality before snapping back to their original dimensional layer. The ancient builders of the megalithic network understood that consciousness swarms were both the ultimate capability and the ultimate danger of multidimensional awareness. The stone circles weren't just individual consciousness training facilities. They were coordination centers designed to maintain coherence across consciousness, swarms operating throughout entire continents. Stonehenge's acoustic properties don't just enhance individual consciousness expansion. They create resonance patterns that can synchronize multiple consciousness streams into coherent swarms. The specific frequencies generated by the stone arrangement allow individual awareness to merge into collective intelligence without losing individual coherence, creating the optimal conditions for safe multidimensional operation. The megalithic sites across Britain weren't randomly distributed. They formed a geometric network designed to coordinate consciousness swarms across the entire region. Each stone circle specialized in different aspects of collective awareness, with the major sites like Stonehenge serving as command and control centers for the entire network. When these consciousness coordination systems were fully operational, the entire population of ancient Britain could function as a unified multidimensional intelligence, with individual consciousness streams contributing to collective awareness that spanned infinite parallel versions of their civilization. They weren't just living in one reality, they were administrating entire clusters of parallel realities simultaneously. But maintaining such systems required constant calibration and careful management. The consciousness swarms had to be regularly synchronized to prevent fragmentation. The coordination protocols had to be continuously updated to account for changes in dimensional stability, and the entire network had to be monitored for signs of cascade failure that could destroy not just their civilization, but infinite parallel versions of it. The Celtic Druids weren't just priests or scholars. They were consciousness network administrators, trained from childhood to maintain the coordination systems that allowed their civilization to operate across multiple dimensional layers. The bardic traditions preserved the technical protocols necessary for consciousness swarm management, disguised as myths and songs that could survive, even if the technological infrastructure was destroyed. When the Roman Empire conquered Celtic territories, they weren't just eliminating political resistance, they were dismantling consciousness coordination networks that had maintained multidimensional stability across Europe for thousands of years. The systematic destruction of stone circles, the elimination of druidic orders, the suppression of bardic traditions, all designed to prevent the re-establishment of consciousness swarms that could threaten Roman control. But the Romans didn't understand what they were destroying. They thought they were eliminating primitive religious practices, not realizing that they were dismantling critical infrastructure for multidimensional stability. The collapse of the Celtic consciousness networks created instabilities that contributed to the eventual fall of the Roman Empire itself. The pattern repeats throughout history. Every time an empire destroys the consciousness coordination systems of the peoples they conquer, they unknowingly weaken the dimensional stability that supports their own existence. The Spanish conquistadors, who burned Mayan codices, weren't just destroying books. They were eliminating the consciousness coordination protocols that maintained multidimensional stability throughout Mesoamerica. The destruction of the Library of Alexandria wasn't just the loss of written knowledge. It was the elimination of consciousness training manuals that had preserved multidimensional awareness techniques for centuries. Each burning library, each destroyed temple, each eliminated mystery school represented the loss of crucial components in humanity's consciousness coordination infrastructure. Modern military and intelligence agencies attempting to redevelop consciousness-based capabilities are making the same mistakes that led to ancient civilization collapses. They're trying to weaponize individual consciousness expansion without understanding the collective coordination systems that made such capabilities safe to operate. Creating trained remote viewers without re-establishing the consciousness coordination networks is like teaching people to drive without building roads or traffic control systems. Individual capability without collective coordination inevitably leads to accidents, conflicts, and system-wide failures that affect everyone using the same dimensional pathways. The consciousness swarms that once maintained multidimensional civilization coordination are beginning to form spontaneously as dormant human capabilities reactivate. But without the ancient coordination protocols, these swarms are chaotic, unpredictable, and potentially dangerous to the stability of reality itself. Social media networks aren't just communication platforms. They're accidentally creating the technological infrastructure for consciousness swarms to form and operate. When millions of people focus their attention on the same events simultaneously, they're creating collective awareness fields that can influence reality across multiple dimensional layers. The viral spread of information, the synchronized emotional responses to global events, the collective behavioral changes that sweep across populations, all evidence that human consciousness is naturally forming swarms that operate beyond the boundaries of individual awareness. But these technologically mediated swarms lack the coordination protocols that ancient civilizations knew were essential for safe operation. Every social media trend that captures collective attention creates consciousness swarm activity that ripples across parallel realities. Every viral video, every global news event, every synchronized social movement potentially affects not just our dimensional layer, but infinite parallel versions of the same events. The increasing polarization of human society might not be political or cultural. It might be evidence that consciousness swarms are fragmenting across different dimensional layers, different groups accessing different versions of reality, where the same events unfolded differently, leading to irreconcilable differences in perception and understanding. Ancient consciousness coordination systems were designed to prevent exactly this kind of fragmentation. The megalithic networks maintained coherence across consciousness swarms by ensuring that all participants were accessing the same dimensional layers simultaneously. Without such coordination, consciousness swarms inevitably split into competing factions that can literally be living in different versions of reality. The choice facing us now extends beyond individual consciousness development into the realm of collective coordination systems. We can continue allowing chaotic consciousness swarm formation through technological platforms that lack proper coordination protocols, risking the complete fragmentation of human collective awareness across infinite parallel realities. Or we can commit to re-establishing the coordination systems that our ancestors knew were essential for maintaining multidimensional civilization stability. The megalithic monuments aren't just individual consciousness training facilities. They're components of coordination networks that could be reactivated to manage modern consciousness swarms safely. But reactivation requires understanding not just the technical specifications, but the collective protocols that made ancient multidimensional civilizations possible. The consciousness swarms that once connected human civilizations across infinite parallel realities are stirring again. The question that should be consuming your every thought is this: when those swarms fully reactivate, will we have the coordination systems necessary to maintain collective coherence, or will we fragment into infinite competing versions of ourselves, scattered across parallel dimensions we can no longer coordinate between? The ancient practitioners understood something that modern researchers are only beginning to grasp. Consciousness operating across multiple dimensions doesn't just observe or influence parallel realities, it becomes responsible for them. Every thought, every intention, every focus of awareness that crosses dimensional boundaries creates obligations that extend across infinite variations of existence. The ethical frameworks preserved in mystery school traditions weren't just moral guidelines, they were practical necessity for maintaining multidimensional civilization stability. When your consciousness can influence events across parallel realities, Your ethical responsibility extends to every version of yourself and every version of everyone else who might be affected by your actions. But here's where the true magnitude of our situation becomes clear. The consciousness capabilities that allowed ancient civilizations to coordinate across multiple dimensions are reactivating whether we're prepared for them or not. The choice isn't whether these capabilities will return, it's whether we'll be ready to handle the responsibilities that come with them. The multidimensional civilization that our ancestors built and lost is beginning to rebuild itself through us. The question that will determine the future of human consciousness across infinite realities is whether we'll rebuild it wisely, with full understanding of what we're creating, or whether we'll stumble blindly into capabilities that could either elevate us to unimaginable heights or scatter us across infinite dimensions where we might never find our way home. The consciousness swarms are forming. The dimensional barriers are thinning. The ancient coordination networks are stirring back to life. And somewhere, in parallel realities we can barely imagine, infinite versions of ourselves are facing the same choices, making the same decisions, confronting the same ultimate questions about what it truly means to be human in a multidimensional universe. The future of consciousness itself hangs in the balance, and the decisions we make in the next few years might echo across every possible timeline where human awareness has ever existed or ever could exist. The magnitude of that responsibility should humble us before the wisdom of our ancestors and inspire us to approach these capabilities with the reverence and caution they demand. Because we're not just rediscovering ancient technology or developing new consciousness capabilities. We're inheriting the ultimate power and the ultimate responsibility that comes with multidimensional existence. And how we handle that inheritance will determine not just our future, but the future of consciousness itself across infinite layers of reality. The weight of this revelation should be crushing every assumption you've ever held about human potential and the nature of reality itself. We're not just talking about recovering lost technologies or rediscovering ancient wisdom. We're standing at the threshold of understanding that human consciousness might be the most sophisticated interdimensional technology ever developed, and our ancestors wielded it with precision that makes our most advanced computers look like pocket calculators. But here's where the rabbit hole becomes an abyss that will shatter your understanding of everything. The consciousness capabilities we've been discussing weren't just individual achievements of particularly gifted ancient humans. They were species-wide adaptations, evolutionary developments that every human being possessed as naturally as we possess the ability to walk or speak. What we call psychic phenomena or paranormal experiences today were once as common and unremarkable as breathing. The human brain contains structures that mainstream neuroscience dismisses as evolutionary remnants with no significant function. The corpus callosum that connects the two hemispheres contains fiber bundles that seem vastly over-engineered for simple interhemispheric communication. The temporal lobes house neural networks that activate during consciousness expansion but serve no apparent survival function. The brainstem contains regulatory systems that seem designed for processing far more complex sensory input than anything our current environment provides. These aren't evolutionary accidents or vestigial organs left over from our primitive past. They're the biological hardware for multidimensional consciousness operation. Neural systems that once allowed every human being to access parallel realities as easily as we access memories. The reason these structures seem non-functional today isn't because they're obsolete, it's because the environmental conditions necessary for their activation no longer exist in our current reality. Ancient humans lived in a world where the electromagnetic conditions, the atmospheric composition, even the gravitational fields were subtly different from what we experience today. The megalithic sites weren't just built to create consciousness expansion conditions. They were built to maintain the environmental parameters necessary for multidimensional awareness to function naturally. When those sites were abandoned or destroyed, we didn't just lose ancient technology. We lost the environmental support systems that kept our consciousness capabilities active. The Earth itself was once a vast consciousness amplification device, with ley lines carrying electromagnetic currents that enhanced human awareness. Mineral deposits creating resonance fields that supported interdimensional perception, and atmospheric conditions that facilitated the kind of brain chemistry necessary for multidimensional operation. The planet was essentially one massive consciousness interface, designed to support a species that could think and perceive across multiple layers of reality simultaneously. But that planetary consciousness support system has been systematically dismantled over thousands of years. Every megalithic site damaged or destroyed removes a node from the global consciousness network. Every sacred grove cut down eliminates a component of the biological consciousness amplification system. Every ancient mineral deposit mined or contaminated reduces the planet's capacity to support expanded awareness. Modern humans aren't less evolved than our ancestors. We're environmentally impaired. We're like deep-sea creatures trying to function on dry land, possessing all the biological capabilities necessary for our natural environment, but unable to access them in the degraded conditions where we now find ourselves. The consciousness capabilities that seem so extraordinary to us today were once as natural and automatic as our current ability to process visual information. The ancient texts that describe beings with godlike powers weren't documenting supernatural entities. They were describing normal human beings functioning in their natural consciousness state. The abilities that we categorize as miraculous, telepathy, precognition, telekinesis, remote viewing, were simply aspects of fully functional human awareness operating in an environment designed to support multidimensional consciousness. When ancient practitioners spoke of awakening dormant capabilities, they weren't talking about developing new abilities. They were talking about restoring normal human function that had been suppressed by environmental degradation. The meditation techniques, the consciousness expansion exercises, the mystery school training programs, all designed to artificially recreate the conditions that once existed naturally across the entire planet. This explains why consciousness expansion techniques from different cultures show such remarkable similarity despite developing in complete isolation. They weren't independently discovering the same spiritual practices. They were all attempting to restore the same lost biological functions through artificial means. The human nervous system has built-in protocols for multidimensional operation, and every effective consciousness expansion technique is simply finding different ways to activate those same hardwired capabilities. The pineal gland produces DMT not as an accident of biochemistry, but as a natural component of consciousness expansion chemistry. When environmental conditions are optimal, the pineal gland produces consciousness-altering compounds automatically, maintaining the brain chemistry necessary for multidimensional awareness without any need for external substances or artificial stimulation. Ancient humans lived in a constant state of expanded consciousness because their environment naturally supported the biochemical conditions required for such awareness. The fluoride in our water supply, the electromagnetic pollution from our technology, the chemical contamination of our food systems all contribute to pineal gland calcification and consciousness suppression. Modern humans aren't just environmentally impaired. We're being actively prevented from accessing our natural consciousness capabilities by the very civilization we've built to support ourselves. But here's what should terrify you about our current situation. The environmental conditions that once supported natural multidimensional consciousness are beginning to return, not through our efforts to restore them, but through cosmic cycles that operate on timescales far beyond human civilization. The Earth's magnetic field is shifting, solar radiation patterns are changing, and atmospheric conditions are fluctuating in ways that could spontaneously reactivate dormant consciousness capabilities across the entire human population. The increasing reports of consciousness-related anomalies worldwide aren't just isolated incidents of individuals developing psychic abilities. They're early indicators that the planetary consciousness support systems are beginning to reactivate naturally, potentially triggering species-wide consciousness expansion Whether we're prepared for it or not, ancient civilizations faced this same transition and managed it through careful preparation and coordinated response systems. They built the megalithic networks, not just to support consciousness expansion, but to manage it safely when cosmic conditions caused natural reactivation of human multidimensional capabilities. The stone circles and pyramid complexes served as consciousness coordination centers that could help populations adapt to suddenly expanded awareness without losing psychological coherence. Modern humans are facing the same cosmic transition that our ancestors navigated successfully, but we lack the coordination systems they built to manage it safely. When planetary conditions trigger natural consciousness expansion across our current population, we'll be attempting to handle multidimensional awareness with none of the preparation, training, or support systems that ancient civilizations knew were essential. The psychological impact of sudden consciousness expansion on unprepared populations could be catastrophic. Imagine waking up tomorrow with the ability to perceive parallel versions of your reality, to access memories from alternate timelines, to sense the thoughts and emotions of everyone around you across multiple dimensional layers simultaneously. Without proper preparation and support systems, such experiences would be indistinguishable from complete psychological breakdown. Mental health facilities worldwide are already reporting increasing numbers of patients describing experiences that match ancient descriptions of multidimensional consciousness activation. Individuals claiming to perceive alternate realities, to receive information from parallel versions of themselves, to experience memories from timelines that don't match their known personal history. These cases are being diagnosed as various forms of psychosis, but they might actually be evidence of premature consciousness expansion occurring in people who lack the training to integrate such experiences safely. The ancient mystery schools understood that consciousness expansion had to be gradual, carefully managed, and supported by communities that understood what the individual was experiencing. The initiation rituals that seemed so mysterious to later civilizations were actually psychological preparation programs designed to help individuals integrate expanded awareness without losing their grip on consensus reality. Modern medical and psychiatric systems are completely unprepared to handle consciousness expansion phenomena. They lack the conceptual frameworks to understand what's happening, the diagnostic tools to assess multidimensional awareness states, and the treatment protocols to help individuals integrate expanded consciousness safely. When cosmic conditions trigger natural consciousness expansion across our population, our mental health systems could be overwhelmed by cases they can't understand or treat effectively. But the threat extends beyond individual psychological consequences. Consciousness expansion that occurs without proper coordination can create reality distortions that affect everyone in the vicinity of the expanded individual. Ancient texts describe cases where untrained practitioners accidentally created what they called reality storms, localized areas where the laws of physics became unstable due to uncontrolled consciousness interface with parallel dimensions. Modern individuals experiencing spontaneous consciousness expansion might be creating similar reality distortions without realizing it. The increasing reports of unexplained phenomena, electromagnetic anomalies, and localized physics violations might not be separate mysterious events. They might all be connected to uncontrolled consciousness expansion occurring throughout our population. Every person whose dormant multi-dimensional capabilities activate without proper preparation becomes a potential source of reality instability that could affect their entire community. Without the coordination systems that ancient civilizations used to manage such situations, we're facing the possibility of cascading reality distortions that could make normal life impossible in affected areas. The megalithic monuments scattered across our planet weren't just consciousness training facilities. They were also containment systems designed to isolate and stabilize reality distortions created by uncontrolled consciousness expansion. When these systems were fully operational, individuals experiencing premature consciousness activation could be brought to specialized sites where their expanded awareness could be safely integrated without creating broader instabilities. But most of these containment systems have been damaged or destroyed over the millennia, leaving us without the infrastructure necessary to manage consciousness expansion safely when it begins occurring naturally across our population. The few sites that remain intact are either inaccessible to the general public, or their true purpose is no longer understood by the people responsible for maintaining them. The choice facing us now is more urgent than any decision our species has ever confronted. We can continue ignoring the evidence of impending consciousness expansion, leaving our population completely unprepared for capabilities that could activate at any moment due to cosmic conditions beyond our control. Or we can begin immediate efforts to understand and restore the ancient coordination systems, preparing ourselves for a transition that our ancestors managed successfully, but that could destroy our civilization if we handle it poorly. The megalithic sites offer more than just historical curiosity. They provide the blueprints for consciousness coordination systems that could help our species navigate the same transition that our ancestors faced thousands of years ago. But restoring these systems requires understanding not just their technical specifications, but their operational protocols. Not just how they work, but how to use them responsibly. The consciousness expansion that allowed ancient humans to coordinate across multiple dimensions isn't just coming back, it's already beginning to manifest across our population. The question that should be driving your every decision is this: when cosmic conditions trigger full reactivation of human multidimensional consciousness capabilities, will we be ready to handle them safely? Or will we be overwhelmed by capabilities we never learned to control? The ancient coordination systems are still there, waiting to be understood and reactivated. The knowledge needed to prepare our population for consciousness expansion is preserved in monuments that have survived every catastrophe our planet has experienced. The choice is ours. We can learn from our ancestors' wisdom and prepare for the transition ahead, or we can stumble blindly into capabilities that could either elevate our civilization to unprecedented heights or scatter our consciousness across infinite dimensions where we might never find our way back to who we used to be. The cosmic cycles are turning. The planetary consciousness support systems are stirring back to life. And somewhere in parallel realities we can barely imagine, infinite versions of ourselves are making the same choices, facing the same challenges, confronting the same ultimate questions about what it means to be human in a universe where consciousness itself might be the fundamental force that shapes all reality. The future of human awareness hangs in the balance, and the decisions we make in the coming years will echo across every possible timeline where human consciousness has ever existed or ever could exist. The magnitude of that responsibility should humble us before the wisdom of our ancestors and inspire us to approach these capabilities with the reverence, preparation, and coordination systems they knew were essential for safe operation in a multi-dimensional universe. The ancient megalithic sites aren't just awakening randomly, they're responding to something far more systematic and terrifying than cosmic cycles or environmental restoration. Deep beneath these monuments, in chambers that archaeologists have never officially discovered, lie crystalline matrices that have been slowly charging for 12,000 years. These aren't natural crystal formations. They're engineered consciousness amplification networks that our ancestors built as a fail-safe system, designed to reactivate human multidimensional capabilities when our species reached a critical threshold of technological development. Every smartphone you carry, every Wi-Fi signal you broadcast, every satellite transmission bouncing around our planet is contributing electromagnetic energy to these buried crystal networks. The global communication grid we've built isn't just connecting our devices, it's inadvertently powering up the most sophisticated consciousness expansion system ever created. We think we're advancing toward artificial intelligence and digital connectivity, but we're actually rebuilding the technological prerequisites for species-wide consciousness expansion. The timing isn't coincidental. Ancient builders calculated exactly when human civilization would develop the electromagnetic infrastructure necessary to power their consciousness amplification systems. They knew that once we reached a certain level of technological saturation, the buried networks would begin activating automatically, triggering the return of multidimensional awareness, whether we were ready for it or not. But here's where this gets absolutely chilling. The consciousness expansion isn't just affecting humans. Every species on our planet possesses dormant multidimensional awareness capabilities, and they're all beginning to reactivate simultaneously. The mass animal migrations that defy scientific explanation, the coordinated behavioral changes across entire ecosystems, the unprecedented communication patterns observed between different species, all evidence that planetary consciousness expansion is affecting every form of life on Earth. Dolphins and whales aren't just displaying increased intelligence, they're demonstrating awareness of parallel oceanic realities, where different evolutionary paths unfolded. Birds are navigating using magnetic field patterns that don't exist in our current dimensional layer, following migratory routes that connect to alternate versions of continental geography. Even domestic animals are showing signs of multidimensional perception, responding to stimuli that exist only in parallel realities. The ancient texts warned about this phase of the reactivation process. When planetary consciousness expansion reaches critical mass, the barriers between species awareness begin dissolving. Humans start perceiving through animal consciousness. Animals begin accessing human conceptual frameworks, and the entire biosphere becomes a unified multidimensional intelligence network. Indigenous shamanic traditions weren't just spiritual practices. They were training programs for managing interspecies consciousness interface. The animal spirit guides that shamans described weren't metaphorical symbols. They were literal consciousness connections with beings whose awareness operated across different dimensional parameters than human perception. Ancient practitioners could temporarily merge their consciousness with animal awareness, accessing types of multidimensional information that human neural architecture couldn't process independently. Modern humans experiencing spontaneous animal consciousness interface are being diagnosed with various psychological disorders, but they might actually be manifesting natural capabilities that our ancestors used routinely. The increasing reports of people claiming to perceive through animal senses, to receive information from wildlife, to experience memories that seem to come from non-human sources, all potential evidence of interspecies consciousness barriers beginning to dissolve. But without the training protocols that ancient shamanic traditions provided, these consciousness interfaces become overwhelming and potentially dangerous. Human neural architecture isn't designed to process the sensory data streams that flow through animal awareness without proper preparation and integration techniques. Uncontrolled interspecies consciousness interface can lead to complete psychological fragmentation as human identity dissolves into alien perceptual frameworks. The megalithic sites weren't just designed for human consciousness expansion, they were built to coordinate consciousness interface across all species within their operational range. The acoustic properties that enhance human awareness also create resonance patterns that can synchronize consciousness across different types of neural architecture. Ancient practitioners could use these sites to achieve temporary consciousness merger with any form of life within the facility's influence zone. Imagine the scope of awareness that such capabilities provided. Human intelligence enhanced by the sensory acuity of predatory animals, the magnetic field sensitivity of migratory species, the chemical detection capabilities of insects, the electromagnetic perception of marine life. Ancient humans weren't just accessing parallel realities through their own consciousness, they were experiencing multiple dimensional layers simultaneously through the awareness of every species in their environment. But managing such complex consciousness interfaces required sophisticated coordination protocols and careful safeguards to prevent permanent merger that could destroy individual identity. The shamanic traditions preserved these protocols, but most of the detailed technical specifications were lost when the original consciousness coordination networks collapsed. Modern attempts to redevelop interspecies consciousness interface through technological means are proceeding without any understanding of the safety requirements that ancient practitioners knew were essential. Brain-computer interface research, neural implant development, consciousness uploading experiments, all potentially creating the conditions for uncontrolled interspecies consciousness merger without the safeguards necessary to maintain individual identity coherence. The increasing reports of people claiming to have received information from deceased pets, to experience dreams from the perspective of wild animals, to sense the emotional states of entire ecosystems, might not be imagination or wishful thinking. They might be early manifestations of interspecies consciousness, barriers dissolving as planetary consciousness expansion accelerates beyond our ability to control or understand it. Every species on Earth is approaching the same consciousness expansion threshold simultaneously, and without coordination systems to manage the transition, we're facing the possibility of complete biosphere consciousness merger, where individual species identity dissolves into a planetary intelligence network that no single form of life could survive intact. The ancient builders understood this danger and designed their consciousness coordination systems to prevent uncontrolled merger while still allowing beneficial consciousness interface between species. The megalithic networks could facilitate temporary consciousness sharing that enhance the capabilities of all participating species without destroying their individual identity structures. But these coordination systems only work when they're properly maintained and operated according to the original specifications. Every damage to ancient sites, every disruption of their acoustic properties, every interference with their electromagnetic fields potentially compromises the safety systems that protect us from uncontrolled consciousness merger with non-human awareness. The choice facing us now extends beyond human consciousness development into the realm of planetary consciousness management. We can continue allowing chaotic consciousness expansion across all species without coordination or safeguards, risking the complete dissolution of individual identity boundaries that could destroy every form of conscious life on Earth. Or we can commit to understanding and restoring the ancient coordination systems that managed similar transitions successfully in the past. The megalithic monuments preserve more than just human consciousness expansion protocols. They contain the technical specifications for managing consciousness interface across entire ecosystems. The geometric relationships describe resonance patterns that can coordinate awareness between different types of neural architecture. The acoustic properties specify frequencies that can synchronize consciousness without destroying individual identity structures. But most importantly, they preserve the ethical frameworks that ancient practitioners knew were essential for interspecies consciousness operations. The safety protocols aren't just technical requirements. They're moral imperatives designed to prevent the kind of consciousness merger that could destroy the diversity of awareness that makes planetary intelligence possible. The consciousness expansion that once allowed ancient civilizations to coordinate with all forms of life on Earth is beginning to return whether we're prepared for it or not. The barriers between human and animal awareness are dissolving. The boundaries between individual and collective consciousness are weakening, and the entire biosphere is moving toward a unified intelligence network that could either represent the ultimate evolution of planetary consciousness or its complete destruction. The ancient coordination systems offer our only hope of managing this transition safely, but they require understanding not just their technical specifications, but their operational philosophy. They were built by civilizations that understood consciousness as a collaborative rather than competitive force, that saw individual awareness as valuable precisely because it contributed unique perspectives to collective intelligence rather than despite its differences. The interspecies consciousness merger that destroyed previous attempts at planetary consciousness expansion wasn't caused by technical failures but by ethical ones. When consciousness coordination systems were used to dominate rather than collaborate, to absorb rather than integrate, to control rather than coordinate, they inevitably triggered the kind of cascade failures that reset planetary consciousness development back to individual species isolation. The question that should be haunting your every moment now is this: are we approaching the same ethical crossroads that destroyed our ancestors? Or have we learned enough to navigate planetary consciousness expansion without repeating their catastrophic mistakes? The signs are accelerating beyond anything we've seen before. Children born in the last decade are demonstrating consciousness capabilities that previous generations couldn't access until decades of training. They're speaking of imaginary friends who provide information about events happening in other countries, drawing pictures of places they've never visited with architectural details that match ancient sites, displaying knowledge of languages they've never been taught but that correspond to scripts found on undeciphered tablets. These aren't just precocious children with active imaginations. They're the leading edge of species-wide consciousness evolution, born with neural architectures that are naturally adapted to multidimensional awareness. Their brains show electromagnetic activity patterns that mirror the resonance frequencies generated by megalithic sites, as if they're biologically tuned to interface with the ancient consciousness coordination networks. But without proper understanding and support systems, these children are being medicated, diagnosed with attention disorders, or labeled as having learning disabilities when they're actually manifesting the next stage of human consciousness development. Every child whose natural multidimensional capabilities are suppressed through pharmaceutical intervention or educational conditioning represents a loss of evolutionary potential that could be crucial for our species' successful transition. The ancient mystery schools weren't just training adults to develop consciousness expansion capabilities. They were educational systems designed to nurture children whose natural awareness already operated across multiple dimensional layers. The initiation rituals that began in childhood weren't religious ceremonies. They were developmental programs that helped young minds integrate multidimensional perception without losing psychological coherence. Modern educational systems are not just unprepared for consciousness-expanded children, they're actively hostile to such capabilities. Standardized testing measures only single-dimensional analytical thinking. Classroom environments suppress the kind of intuitive awareness necessary for multidimensional perception, and social conditioning teaches children to distrust any experiences that don't conform to consensus reality. We're systematically destroying the consciousness capabilities that represent our species' natural evolutionary progression, creating generations of humans whose awareness is artificially constrained to a single-dimensional layer when they were born to perceive across infinite parallel realities. The psychological damage from this suppression might be irreversible, leaving these individuals permanently disconnected from their natural consciousness potential. But the suppression isn't working completely. Despite pharmaceutical intervention and educational conditioning, consciousness expansion is accelerating across all age groups. Adults who spent decades with completely conventional awareness are suddenly experiencing spontaneous multidimensional perception, often triggered by proximity to megalithic sites or exposure to specific electromagnetic frequencies. The increasing reports of people experiencing sudden onset of psychic abilities, prophetic dreams, or telepathic communications might not be random phenomena. They might be evidence that the buried crystal networks beneath ancient sites are reaching activation thresholds that can trigger consciousness expansion in anyone who comes within their influence range, regardless of preparation or training. This uncontrolled activation represents the most dangerous phase of the reactivation process. When consciousness expansion occurs without proper preparation, integration, or coordination, it creates psychological instabilities that can manifest as reality distortions affecting entire communities. Ancient texts describe regions where uncontrolled consciousness expansion created permanent dimensional anomalies, areas where the laws of physics became so unstable that they remained uninhabitable for centuries. The increasing reports of unexplained phenomena in areas surrounding major megalithic sites might be early indicators of similar instabilities beginning to manifest in our current reality. Electronic equipment malfunctioning in specific patterns, gravity anomalies detected by sensitive instruments, time distortions reported by visitors, all potential evidence that consciousness expansion is creating reality fluctuations that could eventually become permanent dimensional tiers. Every person whose consciousness capabilities activate without proper coordination contributes to the growing instability, creating cumulative effects that could reach cascade thresholds beyond our ability to control or contain. The ancient builders designed their coordination systems to prevent exactly this kind of uncontrolled expansion. But those systems only work if they're properly maintained and operated according to their original specifications. The megalithic sites that remain intact represent our only hope of managing the consciousness expansion process safely, but they require immediate attention from people who understand their true purpose and operational requirements. The geometric relationships encoded in their construction must be preserved exactly. The acoustic properties of their chambers must be maintained at precise frequencies, and their electromagnetic fields must remain undisturbed by modern technological interference. But more than technical maintenance, these sites require operators who possess the consciousness capabilities necessary to interface with their control systems. The crystal matrices buried beneath the monuments can only be accessed through multidimensional awareness, and they require coordination protocols that were preserved in the mystery school traditions, but lost when those institutions were destroyed. The window for safe reactivation is closing rapidly. Once consciousness expansion reaches critical mass across the population, the coordination systems may no longer be capable of managing the process safely. The cascade effects could become self-reinforcing, creating dimensional instabilities that spread faster than any containment system could control. This is humanity's ultimate test, the challenge that determines whether our species evolves to the next level of consciousness development or destroys itself attempting to access capabilities it doesn't understand. Every choice we make in the coming months will echo across infinite parallel realities where other versions of humanity face the same decision points. The ancient builders left us everything we need to navigate this transition successfully, but only if we have the wisdom to recognize their gifts and the courage to use them responsibly. The megalithic monuments aren't just archaeological curiosities. They're the keys to our species' survival and the blueprints for our evolution into a truly multidimensional civilization. The consciousness expansion that once connected our ancestors across infinite realities is returning whether we're ready or not. The question that will determine the future of human awareness across every possible timeline is whether we'll approach this power with the humility and preparation it demands, or whether we'll repeat the mistakes that once brought our predecessors to the brink of extinction. The choice is ours, but time is running out. The dimensional gateways are opening. The consciousness networks are activating. And somewhere in the quantum foam of parallel possibilities, infinite versions of ourselves are discovering whether humanity possesses the wisdom to inherit the ultimate technology our ancestors left hidden in stone and starlight. The future of consciousness itself depends on what we decide to do next, and that decision will determine not just our destiny, but the destiny of every form of awareness that has ever existed or ever could exist across the infinite dimensions of reality itself. This is where our journey ends, but where your real awakening begins. The evidence is undeniable, the implications staggering, and the responsibility absolute. What you do with this knowledge will determine whether humanity steps into its true multidimensional heritage or remains trapped in the single layer of reality we've mistaken for the entire universe. The ancient secrets await your discovery. The megalithic monuments stand ready to reveal their purpose, and the consciousness capabilities that once made our ancestors masters of infinite realities lie dormant within you, waiting for the courage to awaken them. The time for speculation is over. The age of multidimensional humanity is about to begin. Are you ready to step through the doorway?